I'm Julia Child. Welcome to my house. What fun we're going to have baking all kinds of incredible cakes, pies, and breads right here in my own kitchen. This festive array includes amaretti, pizzelle, and biscotti. They're fun to make with the guidance of master teacher and author Nick Malgieri of Peter Kump's New York Cooking School. Learn how on Baking with Julia. When you're going to an Italian wedding, what do you bring? Well, a great big platter of assorted cookies. And here's Nick Malgieri, who's going to show us how to do them.
We sure are. We're going to start with some zaletti. These are Venetian cornmeal cookies that have some currants in them. And although we don't think of cornmeal as a dessert ingredient, it's pretty common in northern Italy. There are several cookies and cakes made with cornmeal. I'm going to start making them right now, as a matter of fact. And I'll start with a cup of all-purpose flour. And I like to measure the flour by gently spooning it into the cup like this and then leveling it off.
How much is 1 cup weigh?
That makes about 4 1/4 to 4 1/2 ounces. That's just leveling it off. So I've got a cup of flour, and I'm also going to use a cup of yellow cornmeal. What I really like to do, if I can, is use stone ground cornmeal, because I find that the stone ground cornmeal has a lot more corn flavor.
I think it does.
And it definitely has a lot more oomph than the degerminated cornmeal.
That's a fairly coarse cornmeal.
Yeah,
You can buy that at a health food store.
Definitely. Health food store. And actually, you can get some stone ground cornmeal in the supermarket, too.
Good.
So continuing along with the ingredients here, I've got 1/3 of a cup of sugar. And I'm not quite so careful about measuring the sugar. And then we've got 1/4 of a teaspoon of salt and a teaspoon of baking powder. That's just regular double-acting baking powder. But I'm going to set this aside for a second while we get our liquid ingredients ready. And here I've got an egg, and that's a large egg, and a yolk, which I'm going to just save our egg white here for our amaretti later on. And a teaspoon of vanilla extract goes in.
Pure vanilla extract.
Pure vanilla extract. So here I'm grating the zest from a lemon, and we previously rinsed off the lemon. And I find that this kind of a grater that has these diagonal type holes, as opposed to a box grater that has those kind of nail holes in it, really works well, because you get a lot of zest from one lemon.
You certainly do.
And the one thing that's important about that, I think, is not to press too hard while grating, so that you don't get a lot of that white stuff that's underneath the outside.
Press,
So I'm just going to whisk that up together, and I think we're almost ready to go here. Here we've got our egg yolk, vanilla, and lemon zest ready. And I'm going to take and, first of all, just mix the dry ingredients. That's, again, the cornmeal flour, sugar, salt, and baking powder. And here I've got a stick of butter, and I'm just going to kind of use my hands for this, because I'm going to rub it in by hand.
Clean hands.
Definitely, definitely. The butter does not need to be softened at all, although if it has been at room temperature for a few minutes while you're getting the other ingredients ready, then it will incorporate a lot more easily. But there's absolutely no reason not to use butter that's cold from the refrigerator. That works just fine.
Unsalted
It
butter.
is unsalted butter. I always use unsalted butter. Okay, so here we've got our butter pretty well worked in. This is a cup of currants, which we rinsed off under some cold water so that they would separate from each other, so that there wouldn't be lumps. And just put them in a strainer and rinse them off under some cool water. If you find that the currants are a little bit dry, that one of the things you can do is take the currants and rinse them off under some hot water. And that kind of rehydrates them a little bit again. I'm going to take a rubber spatula here and get my egg mixture in. And I think I'll just mix that in by hand, because we're going to take and turn this out onto the work surface.
It's a perfectly simple mixture, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. It's kind of like making a pastry dough. There's nothing really difficult, and I think the only difficult thing is getting the dough off your hands, which this is kind of an easy way to do that. If you're organized about it and you do one finger at a time, it's easier and it is a little bit cleaner. So what I'm going to do is get a little bit of flour here, put it on the work surface, and I'm going to turn my dough out onto it. You see the dough looks a little bit dry right now, but just in a very, very little bit of pressing this together, the dough is going to be perfectly smooth. And this is just completing the final mixing of it. And it's not necessary to knead it a lot. It's not as though it's bread dough and it needs to be handled a great deal. Yeah, but there we go. And the amount of flour that's on the surface is just enough to keep it from sticking. It's not as though you need a ton of flour on there. So anyway, this is easy to cut. I'm just going to use this kind of firm rubber spatula here to cut the dough in half. And I'm going to show you two different ways of working with the dough.
Good.
One is to make what we call classic biscotti. And biscotti, of course, are twice-baked cookies. First of all, we form them into a log. I'm going to grab a little tiny bit more flour there. We form them into a log and put them on a pan. Here's my pan. And I'm going to just slide this on. Slide this toward the front here a little bit. This is a little bit of parchment paper, and you know what? Foil works just as well. Foil will work fine. Okay, so here I've got my dough on the pan. I'm going to flatten it very slightly. I'm going to throw this into the oven now. This is going to bake for about 20 minutes at 350. There we go. And I'm going to put this in the top third of the oven. Now what I'm going to do with the rest of the dough is form the zaletti, like those diamond-shaped cookies that we saw at the beginning. Each one of these is going to be rolled into a log. Again, that's approximately 12 inches long. We're going to flatten them slightly and then just cut across on a diagonal to make diamond shapes. And you see that that works perfectly. So I think I'll just cut a bunch and then put them onto the pan. But you see that those are easy to form. And then we've got a couple of little scraps there, and I'll show you what we do with those.
And you want them kind of rough looking, I guess.
Yeah, they don't need to be perfectly formed. They're not petit four glacé, so they don't need to be 100% perfectly formed. Here's my little scrap, and what I'm going to do is slant each end and just make two little diamonds out of that, too.
Very nice.
So that we wind up with a diamond shape there, too. So we're going to put these in the oven. These, because they're a little bit less thick and smaller, are only going to take about 12 or 15 minutes. And you know, a good precaution, since we're putting that in the bottom of the oven, I'm going to check those in a few minutes. And if we need to, what we can do is slip another pan under there, because especially in an electric oven, you've got the 2 layers of metal so that the fierce bottom heat is not going to burn the bottom of the cookies.
Yeah, good.
Okay, here we have the zaletti that are baked, and I like to do them so that they just have a really light golden brown color. They don't need to be real dark. So we're going to let them cool off a little bit, just to show you how they should be on the bottom. See, they're just a little bit golden.
And they're still a little soft.
Yeah, slight golden
touch. And I noticed you did put another pan underneath.
Yeah, because I was afraid. See, the bottoms are really nicely done, and they would have been charred.
That's such a good idea. I never would have thought of the 2 pans.
It works really well. Now, here we've got our log that we baked, and it's cooled off already. And I'm going to take it and move it over here to the cutting board, and I like to cut these about 1/3 of an inch or so, and you really need to use a sharp serrated knife to do that. So these are going to be the classic biscotti, or twice-baked cookies, where we put them back in the oven for a second baking, where they're going to toast very slightly. And these ends, I always consider them my reward. I always kind of nosh them right away rather than put them back in the oven. So I'm going to just grab these a few at a time and line them up on the pan here. And they don't need to be any distance apart because they're not going to be doing any growing or spreading. Just kind of lining them up. And these now for the second baking are going to become crisp. So
into the oven?
We're going to throw those into the oven now. And again, it's at 350, and it's going to take approximately 10 minutes or so for those to bake to the point where they're going to be crisp. Okay, here we've got the zaletti biscotti that we're taking out, and these are browned quite nicely, as you can see.
How long are they in there?
Nice and golden. They take about 10 minutes or so at 352 color like this. And you see that they are a little bit darker than the diamond-shaped zaletti.
And they have crisp
They do crisp up. In fact, they're going to crisp up even more as they cool.
Fine.
So actually, we can put some of these on our platter now. Here we've got our diamond-shaped zaletti that we can fill in amongst the festive ribbons here. And even though these are warm, I think I'm going to put on a couple of the biscotti just so that we can round out the assortment. And these are really great after they cool. They become nice and crisp.
I'm just going to try one.
I like them warm, too. I think I'm going to try a little bit of that one.
That's good.
Do you see they do crisp up a little bit?
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you, Julia.
And now what, Nick?
We're going to make some amaretti.
What are they?
These are some Italian almond macaroons, and we're going to finish them off in a couple of ways. Some plain, some with some pine nuts on them. And the main ingredient for making this is almond paste. And if you buy almond paste, I'm just going to break this up and start putting it in the mixer here. But when you buy your almond paste, you either want to buy it in this form, which we bought at a specialty store, and it was wrapped up in half-pound pieces, or you want to buy the almond paste that comes in a half-pound can. So I've got my half-pound of almond paste in the mixer, and I'm putting in half of 3/4 of a cup of sugar. We're going to let this mix until the almond paste gets finely crumbed up with the sugar. So now that this is finely crumbed, I'm going to add the rest of the sugar. That was 3/4 of a cup of sugar to start with, and we divided it in half. And that's going to take another couple of seconds just to mix in. Now it's time to add the 2 egg whites. They should kind of go in one at a time when the egg whites are freshly separated like that. Okay, that looks good. I'm going to throw in the other egg white. And
now, what are we looking for?
You know what, Julia? We're looking for this to get mixed to the point where it's starting to stick to the bottom of the bowl, which it's doing. In fact, I'm going to stop. You see, this doesn't get to the point where it's extremely smooth and fluffy.
No. It's rather like, was it Cat's Tongue cookies, where you don't want to overmix.
Exactly. You don't want to overmix, and you don't want to get it to the point where you've got a lot of air beaten into it, because any kind of amaretti or macaroons, which is, of course, what amaretti are going to rise up too much if you beat air into them. So I'm going to fill a pastry bag here, and this has approximately a 1/2-inch plain tube in it. And, you know, filling up the bag is a question of really bending back most of the bag before filling it. And I'm going to put all of the paste for the amaretti right into the pastry bag here.
Nice, very almondy.
Doesn't it? It has a good scent.
You didn't put any almond extract or anything in it?
No, that is definitely right from the almond paste. So we're going to move over here to the pan and pipe these out. This is a fun technique, you know, because the macaroon paste here for the amaretti is fairly firm. What is a fun thing to do, and it makes it a lot easier, is to kind of break the bag in the middle like that, so you have a twist, so that you're really only squeezing out a little bit of it at a time. And my technique for doing that...
About a full tablespoon, would you think?
Yeah, I would think it is, yeah. If you wanted to shape them by hand rather than using the pastry bag, you could measure out tablespoons full. And then, of course, here we'll just squeeze the rest of it down. And the technique for piping is to be about 1/2 inch above the pan.
And I like that little twist.
Squeeze it, and you know what you do? You stop squeezing before you twist away, rather than make a point. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's one of the hardest things about learning how to pipe, is not what to do, but what not to do. Because most people when they pipe, start piping, and they think you've got to pipe around in a circle like that for some reason and make something that's like a funny little squiggle like that, where that really doesn't, you just leave the bag in one place and you squeeze it out and then you stop squeezing and then pull away. Sideways rather than to pull upwards. And I'm just piping out one pan of the amaretti here. And this is a fun technique where what we do is take a clean towel, and it has to be a non-terry cloth type towel. And I'm going to wet the towel in some water here.
I've never heard of this before.
This is fun. And it really, what it does is it gives the amaretti a beautiful finish because they come very straight and crackled on top after we do this. And here I've got my wet cloth, and we take this and we smack it repeatedly.
Not very hard.
No, not very hard. Gently. Smack it down onto the amaretti, and what it does is it wets the surface.
Well, that's
it melts that sugar that's down on the surface. And the other thing that works really perfectly about it is now we lose all the little ridges from piping. So that one there that had the little tail on it, really that disappears. So this is a good technique if you have any little imperfections from piping. So we're going to put some, why don't we put some of these pignoli, the pine nuts, on just that one row of them here. And
I keep dribbling down them.
I know, pignoli are so expensive that I think maybe
are they?
it's not necessary to put a ton of them on, but they're really nice. The flavor of the pine nuts really goes well with the flavor of the almond paste. So here we've got a row with some pine nuts on and some without pine nuts, and we're going to put these in the oven now. They're going to take about 15 minutes or so at 325, and they're going to color nicely and be risen and puffed. Okay, these are done now, and they've colored nicely, and they're firm. And what I'm going to do is just take them.
We cooked very quickly. How long was that about?
It takes about 10 to 15 minutes for them to bake.
They're just barely brown.
Yeah, just nice and golden. And what I like to do, I'm being careful of the hot pan here, but what I like to do is lift the corners of the paper like this and then move them over to a rack to cool. And they need to cool for about 15 minutes. You know, we have to be careful taking these off the paper because now that they've cooled, even though they're cooled through because they have a nice moist center, sometimes they stick to the paper. In fact, this one, I was seeing whether or not they would come off, and that one came off perfectly. But see, the way to do it is to kind of bend the paper back very gently and then remove
you don't want
them.
To break them. No.
And yeah, exactly, because sometimes they do stick a little bit. And this is the method in case you have a problem with the amaretti sticking. There's a little trick you can do. I've got some hot water with a brush here, and if the amaretti stick, you want to take some of the hot water and just paint the back. And I like to do, you know, you could turn the paper over and do all of them at once, but I like to do them one at a time because you see, even that even stuck a little tiny bit there, even though we've got it on the parchment paper.
Now, you really need the parchment paper, don't you?
Parchment really works well for this because it's silicone coated, it's non-stick. Brown paper also works very well.
You can get this at any store now.
Yeah, it's pretty much a supermarket item nowadays. You know what, Julia? I'm going to transfer these over to here. They don't seem to, isn't it funny, those ones with the pine nuts seem to have stuck a little bit, but these other ones seem not to have. I'm going to just take that precaution and wet the backs of these a little bit too, just to make sure they come off. And yeah,
we've got a wonderful cookie tray here, isn't it?
We're certainly building up an assortment.
I'm going to eat one.
Yeah, I'm going to try one of these with the pine nuts.
Now it's lovely and crunchy outside.
And it's moist in the center, which is how they should be.
And they have such a wonderful taste.
I like the almond flavor.
I'm so glad to know how to make these.
These are great. Thank you.
Chef Nick is now going to make these little waffles. They're called pizzelle.
Little pizzas, but not because they've got tomatoes on them, just because they're round and flat like a pizza is. The recipe is really easy to put together. I've got 2 eggs. I'm going to throw in a pinch of salt and just whisk that together. And then 1/2 cup of granulated sugar. And then just whisk that in. We've got a tablespoon of anisette that goes in. And here I've got 6 tablespoons of unsalted butter. That's melted and cooled, and I'm just going to kind of whisk that in. What we've got that's going to go in last, and I'm going to just fold that in after the butter is mixed in, is 1 1/4 cups of all-purpose flour, which is mixed already with 1 1/2 teaspoons of baking powder.
Double action baking powder.
Just plain old baking powder, right. So that just goes right in. Going to fold that in quickly.
Like a crepe.
The ingredients are similar, except we don't have that kind of liquid quality that the crepe batter has. So our batter is all mixed. We just need to bake the pizzelle, and here we've got our pizzelle iron, which is already preheated. And the first time you use a brand new one, you can see it's a little smoky there. First time you use a brand new one, it's a good idea to oil it before you start heating it, but this has been used a little while already. So we're fine with that. And here I'm putting about 1/2 tablespoon of batter right in the center of each one of the impressions here. And I'm going to close it down, and the handle has a clamp on it so that you can close it tight. And the way to tell that it's baking is the fact that, you see the steam coming out. When the steam stops, it's time to open it and take a look.
Well, that's all electric. Look at this old one that I got over in France.
That's a beauty.
Isn't that lovely? It's a nice design, too. That should heat on the stove.
Right, and it needs to be well buttered.
Yes.
Okay, I think this one is almost done. We have a little tiny bit of steam still coming out of it. Here, these look fine. And I like to do them so that they're nice and light. I don't like to have them too dark because with the butter and sugar in them, they can start being a little bit bitter. So there's one that is done. This one had a little tiny bit more batter. And what I'm going to do with this one while it's warm, I'm just going to close that back down again, is to take it here and quarter it, because that can be a nice way to serve them. And they're a little bit neater than trying to eat the whole ones. And you can sprinkle these with confectioner's sugar or not, as you wish. And they can become an addition to our tray of assorted biscotti here.
Or you mentioned ice cream. How about that?
Some beautiful strawberry sorbet here. These look really nice as an addition to the sorbet as a decoration, and also they certainly taste excellent with it.
And we'll have a
Try a little bit here.
I think this is a great idea. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you. This was fun, Julia. It was a real pleasure.
Hope you'll come again, and we'll make some more. And I'm going to eat a macaroon.
Thank you. Me too.
That's delicious.
I love those.
Bon appétit!